Hi, this is Mrs. Rodriguez with another lesson video. Today's lesson video is on solving one-step inequalities. So before we get started on solving one-step of inequalities, I want to review a couple of things we need to know beforehand. So first up, if it's included, meaning the bubble filled in when we graph the inequality, that's going to be the symbols greater than and equal to or less than and equal to. Not included, meaning the bubble stays empty, is just going to be greater than or less than. Okay, now we have this example, x is less than or equal to 5. So we need to remember when we graph inequalities, we take the number and that's where we place the bubble. The next step is to think, is the bubble filled in or empty? Because it has the equal sign attached to the less than, that means it's filled in. Okay. Next we think, all right, is x bigger or smaller than 5? Well, if I draw my little Pac-Man, Pac-Man's eating the 5, so that means 5 is the bigger number. Remember, Pac-Man always eats the bigger number because he's hungry. So if 5 is bigger than x, that means x is smaller than 5, and my arrow goes towards all the numbers smaller than 5. If instead of the inequality, I'm actually given the graph, then remember you're always going to have x, right? The bubble is on the number you need to use, in this case, -1. And then we just look, is x, the numbers bigger than -1 or smaller than -1? And in this case, it's bigger, so that means Pac-Man is going to eat the x. The bubble is empty, so we do not add the equal sign. It does not include the -1. All right. Also, before we continue, don't forget, when you multiply or divide numbers, if they have the same signs, meaning they're both positive or both negative, your answer will be positive. If they have different signs, meaning one's positive, one's negative, or one's negative and one's positive, different signs mean you'll have a negative answer. And last but not least, inverse operations. We need to remember that the opposite of addition is subtraction, the opposite of subtraction is addition, the opposite of multiplication is division, and the opposite of division is multiplication. Okay, so let's get started. What are the steps for solving one-step inequalities? Well, the nice thing about inequalities is that you're basically doing the same thing as when you solved equations. There are a couple of differences, but for the most part, it's exactly the same. The two differences are because you have more than one answer with an inequality, we graph them. So we have to remember that when we're done solving one-step inequalities, we need to graph the inequality, the answer. And the only other thing that's different between inequalities and equations is that if you multiply or divide by a negative number when you're solving inequalities, that's going to cause you to flip the sign. Pac-Man will face the other direction. But everything else is the same. Step 1, you simplify, whether that's combining like terms or doing the distributive property. Step 2 is using the risk method, river, inverse, solve, and check. Make sure you keep your your inequalities balanced, just like on equations. All of that's the same. So you're going to do it just like equations, and then you'll graph. And if you happen to multiply or divide by a negative number, you'll flip the Pac-Man to face the other direction. All right, let's take a look at a couple of examples. So first example, here we have n plus 5 is less than or equal to 16. So just like in equations, we're going to draw a river. Second step, we're going to do the inverse operation. So if this is n plus 5, then we're going to do the opposite and subtract 5. We want to keep our inequality equations balanced, so we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. 5 minus 5 is 0, and we're left with n is less than or equal to 16 minus 5, which is 11. Okay, so we get n is less than or equal to 11. Now, just like equations, we can also check to see if we got the answer correct. And we do that the same way with starting with our original problem. We said that n is less than or equal to 11. And now I can choose any number that's less than or equal to 11 and plug it into the original equation. If it ends up being a true statement, then we know we did it correctly. If it ends up not being true, then we know something went wrong. So the nice thing with inequalities is you can actually choose whatever number you want to check as long as it meets the requirements. So in this case, n is less than or equal to 11. Any number less than or equal to 11. So please always choose easy numbers. It'll make your life easier. So in this case, I'm going to choose n equals 0. Now, I'm going to plug this in for n, and I'm going to see, does it work? Well, 0 plus 5. Is that less than or equal to 16? Yeah, 5 is less than or equal to 16. So it's true. We know we did it correctly. So that's how you would check to see if you got the answer correct. Now, graphing. Don't make the graphing harder than it needs to be. Whatever your answer is, go ahead and put it in the middle. Add a couple of numbers that are bigger, add a couple of numbers that are smaller, and then call the number line done. Next, you're going to put your bubble on your answer, and look, is it filled in or is it empty? In this case, because it has the equal sign attached, that means it's filled in. So I'm going to go ahead and fill it in. And then last but not least, is n bigger or smaller than 11? Well, if I draw in my Pac-Man, you will notice Pac-Man is eating the 11. That means n is smaller, and my arrow is going to go in the direction of all the numbers smaller than 11. Okay, let's try another one. Here we have c minus 8 is greater than 14. So, step 1, we're going to draw the river. Step 2, opposite operations. So if it's minus 8, we're going to add 8. Remember, we want to keep it balanced, so we're going to add 8 to both sides. 8 minus 8 is 0. They cancel out, and we end up with c is greater than 14 plus 8, which is 22. So c is greater than 22. I can check and make sure this is true by plugging a number back into the original equation. So if we said that c is greater than 22, I can pick any number that's greater than 22 to plug in. So I'm going to choose c is 30. Okay, now I'm going to take 30 and I'm going to plug it in for c. And I'm going to see, does it work? 30 minus 8 is greater than 14. Well, 30 minus 8 is 22. Is 22 greater than 14? Yes, it's true. So we did it correctly. So now all I have to do is graph my answer. So once again, 22, the answer will go in the center. Add a couple of numbers that are bigger. Add a couple of numbers that are smaller. Then put the bubble on your number. Check, is the bubble filled in or empty? In this case, there's no equal sign, so we leave it empty. Last but not least, we need to see, okay, which is bigger? Is 22 bigger or smaller than c? Well, if I draw in my Pac-Man, Pac-Man's eating c, so c is bigger than 22. So I'm going to draw my arrow in the direction of all the numbers bigger than 22. Okay. Now, we've looked at a couple of examples that were pretty straightforward. We didn't have to worry about flipping the sign. So let's take a look at what multiplying and dividing looks like. We have to flip the sign. All right, in this example, we have negative 12g is less than 48. So you need to remember that a number next to a variable means multiplication. That's negative g's 12 times. So that's negative 12 times g. All right, step 1, draw the river. Step 2, opposite operation. If we're multiplying here, then the opposite would be dividing. We need to keep it balanced, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 12. Negative 12 divided by negative 12 is 1. 1 times g is just g, and we get g. Now, here's the deal. We just divided by a negative. And remember, we said that if you divide by a negative, we said it up here. If you multiply or divide by a negative, you flip the sign. So, because we divided by a negative, instead of Pac-Man eating the 48, it's going to flip over and eat G. And then 48 divided by a negative 12, a positive divided by a negative, two different signs, so my answer is going to be negative, and 48 divided by 12 is 4. So our answer is going to be G is greater than negative 4. Okay, we can still check to see if we got the correct answer by plugging it into the original problem. So we have negative 12 times G is less than 48. We're saying that G is all the numbers greater than negative 4. So I'm going to choose 0 because 0 is greater than negative 4. It's closer to being positive. And we get negative 12 times 0 is less than 48. Well, 0 times anything is 0, and 0 is definitely less than 48. So it's true, we did it right. And remember, all I did was plug in 0 for G. Now, the only thing I have left to do is graph. So once again, your answer goes in the center. Be careful with negatives because the numbers actually get smaller with the negatives as they get closer to being positive, and the number itself gets bigger as the number starts getting smaller, going towards more negatives to the left, okay? Now I put my bubble on the negative 4. It stays empty because there's no equal sign attached to it. And Pac-Man is eating G. So that means G is bigger than negative 4. And I'm going to point my arrow in all the numbers towards all the numbers bigger than negative 4. Okay, so that was an example of if you have multiplication and you need to divide. So what happens if you have division and you need to multiply? Well, here we go. In this one, we have P is divided by negative 3. And it's greater than the number 9. So I'm going to start off by drawing my river. The opposite of division is multiplication. So I'm going to I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1 because that's going to be negative 3 times P over negative 3. And the two negative 3's can divide out and it equals 1 and cancels out. And we end up with P. Now remember, we just multiplied with a negative, so we have to flip the sign. Pac-Man's going to face the other direction. Don't forget that part. And a negative times a positive is a negative, and 9 times 3 is 27. So we end up with P is less than negative 27. To check the answer, I'm going to go back to the original inequality. We're saying that P is less than negative 27. I can choose any number. So I'm going to choose P is negative 30. Okay. I'm going to put that negative 30 in for P. And I get negative 30 over negative 3 is greater than 9. A negative divided by a negative, same sign, so it's positive. 30 divided by 3 is 10. Is 10 greater than 9? Yep, it's true, so we know we did it correctly. Now all I have to do is graph. The answer goes in the center. Put in a couple that are bigger, a couple that are smaller. Put your bubble on the answer. Once again, this symbol doesn't have an equal sign attached, so the bubble stays empty. And Pac-Man is eating the negative 27s. That means P is smaller than negative 27, and I'm going to point my arrow in the directions of all the numbers smaller than 27. Okay? So, remember, same thing as solving equations. The only difference is at the end you're going to graph, and if you multiply or divide by a negative, it's going to flip the sign. Okay? And as always, if you have any questions or need additional assistance, feel free to make an appointment with me for office hours. Hope you have a great day. Bye.